Hello, in this tutorial I'll show you how to use Blender to draw on a sphere for creating fantasy maps, and this is very useful because every single flat projection of a sphere is going to have some sort of distortion. For example, the most common projection is equirectangular, and the distortion with that is as you go towards the poles, stuff gets stretched out horizontally. So it's really helpful to be working on a sphere, or at least be looking at a reference on a sphere as you're working on your map, so you have a good sense of how it is natively on a sphere instead of with distortions. So Blender has a very useful texture painting mode, which is good for this. So I'll show you how to use that, and let's get right into it. So this is Blender 2.9. So to begin with, I'm going to go to Window and then toggle Window full screen, just so it can be in full screen. And to start off with, we're going to have our default cube. You can delete it by pressing delete on the keyboard, or right-clicking and pressing delete. So next, we're going to want to actually create the sphere for our globe. So you can press Shift A. It'll open up the add dialog. We can go to mesh and then go to UV sphere. And in our scene, out will pop this UV sphere. And then in the bottom left, we can expand the add UV sphere dialog. Now by default, it's going to have 32 segments and 16 rings. Usually I'd like to bump this up to 128 and 64 rings. 128 segments and 64 rings. If your computer slows down when you do this, try 64 and 32. But try and go as far as you can go, as high as you can go, because if you have a low resolution sphere, then it's not going to be as accurate as it could be. So there is our sphere. So you might notice if we zoom in, you can see the boundaries between all of the different polygons on the sphere. And the reason why is that by default, objects in Blender are shaded flat instead of being shaded smooth. So you can right click on our sphere and press shade smooth, and it'll just smooth out all of our vertices, all of our faces. And now we have a nice smooth sphere. So next, we're going to want to actually set up the texture on the sphere. So to start off with, I'm going to show you simply how to put a texture onto the sphere and then draw on it. And then afterwards, I'm going to show you how to layer two textures together. So you can have a reference texture in the background and then, for example, your line work on top. So on the right hand side, we're going to have this bar right here, and at the bottom, there's the material properties section. So currently we don't have any materials, so we're going to want to create a new material. Let's call this material globe. And by default, it's principled BSDF. And right here, for base color, it's white. We can change the color. So as you notice that when I'm changing the color, it's not being displayed in the viewport. And the reason why is by default, viewport shading is set to solid. And we're going to want to set this to material preview. And when you click on material preview, this is showing it as it would be close to being rendered, so to speak. But we don't want to have a base color, we want to have a base texture. So instead of having a solid color, you can click this dot right here to set a texture, and then in the texture section, we can go down to image texture. And if you click on image texture, we can press on open. I'm going to go into my pictures folder and open my earth picture. So of course this would be your con world, or whatever your maps or reference, or maybe even a blank image, depending on your situation. For now, I'm just going to use an image of Earth. And as you can see, it's being projected quite well. So everything's nicely sized. Greenland is not hugely large or stretched. And then Antarctica seems reasonably sized as well. And keep in mind that the projections you put on your sphere must be a equirectangular projection. Otherwise, it will be distorted. So if you have some other projection, there's a free piece of software that's distributed and created by NASA called G-Projector. So you can put in your equirectangular, or actually in this case your other projection. So you can put in your Mercator projection, say, and it'll give you your equirectangular projection. And then after you export your texture from G-Projector, you can bring it in to Blender. But in my case, I already have equirectangular texture, so I'm not going to have to worry about that. Oh, and also the texture is going to need to have a aspect ratio of 2:1 in order to get it to map well. But you probably already have that set up. So next, you might notice there's a little bit of an issue here. So in terms of painting on the map, the colors we see on the sphere are not really representational of what the colors on the texture are, because Blender is creating this specular highlight over here, and the light on the top side is lighter than on the bottom because our scene has lighting. So if we disable the light, actually, never mind. But yeah, so the thing is that it's being lit, and we don't really want it to be lit. So to fix that, if we go down to the material properties again, we can switch the surface from being principled BSDF to emission, and then pick our texture again. Go to pictures, get our texture, and now it's being evenly, actually not lit at all. So it's not being affected by lighting, no highlights, the colors seem to be accurate. So next, if you want to paint it, you can go over to the texture paint window, and I'm going to switch this to material preview up here in the top right. And as you can see on the left hand side, we have a full image of our texture, and on the right we have our globe. So I can click on the left hand side, and we can draw on the left hand side like this, and then it displays on the right. Or I can draw on the right, and then it gets displayed on the left. And as you can see, it looks like straight lines here, but since this is a projection, they've got some curve to them on the left. So obviously the brush is a bit not very good for doing line work for maps and things. So what we can do is first off, go down here and change the color to black, and then move the radius down to something like 8 pixels. Alright, come on, 8 pixels. Yes, 8 pixels. And now it's much more suited for making maps. And also, Blender supports drawing tablets, such as this one I have here. So I'll give that a try with the drawing tablet. So I can draw on here. But you notice that there's a kind of a bit of an issue that if I don't press very much with my stylus, it's being painted on with some opacity, some transparency. So what we're going to want to do is, I mean, maybe you won't want to do this, but for line work generally you're going to want to have a solid, consistent opacity. In order to do that, down here, the strength option, the strength pressure is checked. So if we uncheck that, now all of my line work is nice and solid, even if I'm not pressing very much on the stylus. Keep in mind that if you zoom in, the size of your line scale, so if I zoom out, then it kind of scales with the size of the viewport. I don't know if there's a way to change that, but if there is and you find out how to do that, please let me know. Also, don't mind the fact that this is kind of pixelated, because the texture I brought up is maybe not the highest resolution texture there is. So I'll undo all those lines I made. So depending on what you're doing, this might be completely adequate for you, but what I do is I like to have my reference in the background and then draw on top of that. So next I'll show you how to set up layers, so we can draw one layer of texture on top of another layer of the texture. So for example, if you wanted to have this globe as the reference and then draw the lines on top of it, what you can do is you can go into the shading tab here, and you can press Shift A and add a image texture. I'll put it underneath here. And we want to create a new image texture, and I can call it line work. And as I said before, this has to be a 2:1 aspect ratio. So I'm going to try and go as high resolution as my computer can handle. And I think in this case, maybe 4096 by 2048 is probably going to be good. I might be able to go a bit higher than that, but I think that's all right. And we're going to want the background color to be transparency. So by default, alpha is 1. So we're going to want to bring this back down to 0. And make sure alpha is checked. Otherwise, there isn't going to be an alpha channel. And then press OK. So next, we're going to want to combine these two colors, or these two textures. So press Shift A, and we're going to want to add a Mix RGB node. We want to hook, so we want to disconnect this from emission for now. Move these over here. We're going to want to connect the earth texture to color 1, and then our line work texture to color 2, and the FAC fraction, I believe, connect that to the alpha of the second texture. And then we can just take the color output and connect that to emission over here. So with that done, our globe is displaying properly again. Now the only difference now is that if we go into texture paint, we have two textures up here. We have earth.jpg and we have line work. So we can still edit earth, but we can also go on to line work. So now that I'm on line work, I can draw on the globe just as I did before, but now it's a separate layer. So as I see, if I draw over here, it comes out on the texture on the left, and that seems quite nice. So I'll undo that and just do a quick rough outline of Europe to demonstrate what I mean. Something like this, right? So you could make your maps line work. Kind of messy, but you get the point. And then now you're gonna want to just save it out. That's kind of done for your setup. So if you want to save it, you can go to the texture paint tab where we already are. You can go to the top left, and you can see there's a little asterisk after image showing that it's unsaved. Click on that, and then you can press Save As. Then I'm gonna go into my Pictures folder. I can call this linework.jpg or PNG rather. Save. And then now if I work on this some more and I want to resave it, instead of going up to this menu, we can press Alt S on our keyboard, and you can see it's saved because the asterisk disappears. So I think I've covered everything that needs to be covered there. Hope you found that helpful, and let me know in the comments if you have any problems, and thanks for watching. Bye.